Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to today's session. As you may have heard, this session is being recorded today, and a recording will be made available to everyone who registered in a follow-up email. So welcome to the FITT Skills live webinar series, where we will learn how to select the right target market. So I'm very excited. We have a specialist, a strategist with us today, but more on our guest speaker in a couple minutes. So my name is Laura Rigudo. I am a CITP and I am the Partnerships and Community Lead at FITT. I invite everyone to drop your questions throughout this 30-minute session, and we will answer them at the end of the 30 minutes. And as usual, please feel free to use the chat box to introduce yourself. Perhaps tell us about your current role and the organization you represent, and wherever you're dialing in from. So we welcome all of you. I recognize many names from our robust community of CITPs, FITT Skills students, returning attendees. And if this is your first time joining us, a huge welcome to you. So let me get started here by sharing my presentation. There we go. Everybody should be able to see that. If you can't, just let me know. Oh, all right. So in today's webinar is focused not on the first slide that I just showed you, but today we are focusing on selecting your target market and how to do the research and how to identify that market that offers your organization the biggest opportunities for you. So what we do in this live webinar series is that we take a topic related to our FITT Skills training. Maybe it's a trending topic, maybe it's a topic that's suggested by our community, by you. And we bring in an expert, a CITP, who's lived that, who's learned from our training, and who shares their knowledge with other professionals on a daily basis. So I'm going to go over a little bit of just to give you a background before I pass it over to our speaker. And all of the material that I'll be presenting to you today is taken from our FITT Skills training. And of course, our body of knowledge is copyright. So this is our FITT Skills training. It's a program of 6 courses, everything from feasibility of international trade, and that is going to be the main area of discussion for today, through to international market entry, global value chain, finance, and international sales and marketing. So these are our 6 courses that make up our international business program. So I'm going to go over briefly, the importance of identifying your target market, sources of reliable market intelligence, and our guest speaker is going to go over that as well. Some common pitfalls, best practices for data-driven screening, and when and how to leverage advisors. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a Q&A session at the end. So I often talk about when you're screening potential markets, and it's in our body of knowledge and in our courses, we talk a lot about how to screen markets. What are you screening markets for? And what research, what data is out there? So what secondary data is out there? Those are those market reports, surveys, all those stats that are typically free, so desk research. But then when you're looking at assessing your target markets, that might be where you need to get that primary research, that direct personal contact through consultations. I always mention that the best source of primary research, in my experience and in my 25 years of of being in international trade is trade shows and trade missions. You can speak to so many individuals under one roof at one of these trade shows. And if there is a trade mission component to that trade show, even better, because that's when you get one-to-one matching and you're able to speak to a potential partner at the same time. So I always say, start with the secondary research. It's often free, and then move into the primary research. So good sources of secondary research, and for those global stats are out there. The International Trade Center is a great place to start. Trade data online is, if you're located in Canada, every country keeps stats on trade flows between their nation and all other export and import markets often. But that for Canada, it's by Industry Canada. So it's a great source of information where you can see trade flows. So where Canada is exporting to, broken down or drilled down to your HS code or your NAICS code, and then you can see where we're importing from as well. And then again, this is a Canadian specific source, but Tariff Finder is a great source of information where you can look at your tariff advantage. So you can see this is 4 countries where Canada has signed a free trade agreement. So you can see what the tariff rate is, the duty rate, and then you can compare that with the most favored nation rate. And then there are market reports available, especially if your area is a priority sector that's been identified by the government as a priority sector. So there's often, I've used Statista as an example. They're not the only ones that provide market reports and stats for various industry. I just happen to have used this and had a subscription in the past. You can have a basic account. You can also order one-off reports. Sometimes it is the most efficient decision you can make is to hire an independent researcher, an independent company to create that market report for you to help you identify your target market. It may take someone who may not understand what they need to find, what data are they truly looking for to make those key decisions. So in some cases, it makes more sense to hire someone, an advisor, a consultant, a researcher, to get those key pieces of information that will help you make a strategic decision to enter into a market or not. Testing the waters in market visits are a great way to conduct that primary research, to test the waters, to make sure that this is the market for you before you invest a lot of time and money into that market. So the graphic that I have on the side is usually the way I work my market research. And there is, companies and organizations need to be strategic in their market research and not just research for the sake of researching. But I always say start with the global stats, look for your tariff advantage, and then try to find that key product industry data. Then this information hopefully will allow you to determine the feasibility for your organization to export to that market. So what is the size of the market? What is the growth potential? Can you access that market? And then what are the priorities within that market? And what is the true potential? Who are your customers? How do they buy? Assess all the costs in the market. And only once you've assessed the cost, truly understood what it's going to cost you if you're a product exporter to get your product, land that product into the market, or a service provider, how much is it going to cost you to deliver your services in the market? Only when you have the whole picture view of the costs involved can you determine if there's a margin to be earned. In some cases, there may not be a margin to be earned. And then also another area of research is to understand all the risks that are involved in doing business in that market. We also talk a lot about in the feasibility of international trade course, we talk about the suitability of products and services. So we're looking at adaptations that need to be made to your product or service. We're looking at that whole regulatory compliance piece. We also look at intellectual property protection. So what are the risks in that market? Can you protect your IP? Is that an important decision for you to go into a market where you may not be able to protect your IP or to protect it cost effectively? And then another area that we spend a lot of time in is product liability. So if someone gets injured, consumer gets injured, consuming your product, or as you're delivering your service, what does the product liability piece look like in your target market? So at this point, I am going to stop sharing. And I am going to introduce our speaker for today. So you can see him on our screen. Peter Gray is a CITP, and he has over 20 years of experience helping multinationals and SMEs expand into the ASEAN's high growth markets. He is a seasoned international trade strategist. His career began in Vancouver in 1996 and quickly accelerated with leadership roles across Asia, including a pivotal position in Singapore during the Asian financial crisis, where he led a turnaround to profitability and sustained record growth. Peter holds an MBA in Strategic International Marketing and an MA in International Relations, along with certifications from Concordia and FITT, including the CITP designation. His mission is clear: to help businesses expand with confidence in ASEAN through data-driven strategy, market insight, and strong local partnerships. So Peter, the floor is yours, and I am truly happy to hear and to have you share your knowledge with us today.
Well, thank you, Laura, for the introduction and certainly for the invitation, and hello to everybody and welcome. And I'm hoping to share some of my concepts and ideas with the intention of helping you to expand your businesses into some of the more exciting and high growth markets that are overseas and certainly worth your attention. I'll start by, over the years, Canada's economy has become overly dependent on the United States economy. Approximately 75% of our exports are destined to the USA market. That is starting to change somewhat. Our government has been very assertive over the past few years, developing new export opportunities through new trade agreement initiatives. But trade agreements are not a silver bullet. Entering new markets, it is a business decision and it is a business investment, and it needs to be supported by capital, resources, and a variety of commercial activities. Now, it can be expensive and it can be time consuming, so it's absolutely essential that we select our best market opportunities. So the question really becomes, where do we compete? If we looked at a market such as the European Union, there's 27 individual markets. If we looked at the Indo-Pacific region in its broader context, there's about 38 individual markets. And if we looked at a smaller region like the ASEAN region, there are 11 unique markets. So we need to make choices. And the choices we make need to be based on economic value, the probability of our success, and the level of risk. So ultimately, the decision to go or not to go into a market, it needs to be grounded on factual data and keen analytics. So determining where to compete, it really means identifying the most promising opportunities by leveraging trade agreements, assessing economic potential, evaluating our risk exposure, and weighing the probability of success while also ensuring a positive contribution to the people and society within those markets. Now, it's a sequential process and it starts with secondary research and analytics, which we do remotely. And our objective here is to identify and rank potential markets based on macroeconomics, trade flow data, and risk indicators. And ultimately, this step it justifies the travel expense to conduct in-market primary research. Now, that feeds into primary research and analytics, and we do this in-market. And our objective here is to validate our findings through direct in-market engagement with potential partners, distributors, and end customers. When we complete that, it feeds into the capabilities assessment, which is really becoming trade ready. And our objective here is to align our business capabilities with the market realities, prioritize our high potential opportunities, and adapt strategies to fit market specific conditions and growth potential. So it begins with macroeconomic indicators, and typically we would look at the GDP size, the growth rate, and the segment composition, as you can see on my donut chart on the right. We also look at urbanization and infrastructure investment. We also look at foreign direct investment inflows and outflows. I'll just make a brief comment here is the metrics I'm using are very, very general today, but it's really crucial that you use the metrics that are specific to your business. Now, in this particular step, what we're really doing is we're assessing the health of economies. That would lead us into trade and data. And obviously, what we want to do is export to a country where Canada has an existing trade agreement. And as I had just said, Canada has been very assertive in establishing new trade agreements. And most recently, we had established a bilateral trade agreement with Indonesia. So the CEPA is now in force. I believe that the ASEAN agreement with Canada is in the very near future. And I think ultimately all these trade agreements are really providing a lot of opportunities for Canadian businesses in high growth markets. We also want to identify and track our specific HS code. As Laura had said, every product that trades around the planet, it has a harmonization systems code. And this is how they're tracked as they're traded globally. We want to measure our specific HS code, and we want to do that by code rather than category. Categories have a tendency of being too general and ambiguous. And to give you an example, fruit would be a category, but bananas would have an HS code. So if we were trading in bananas, we would obviously want to understand the trade flows of bananas. We also want to look at market demand and segmentation, and we look at both the total addressable market and the served available market. The distinction here is the addressable market would be the entirety of the market if you were the only person selling in that market. But the reality is that there are many categories of customers in a market. There's also many competitors in the market. So you may have a very, very specialized product, and you may only be able to achieve, say, 10% of the addressable market. But the important thing is we need to identify what that is because we need to put a market value on the market. If we're selling consumer-related products, we have a tendency of looking more specifically at customer and consumer demographics and psychographics. If we're selling industrial products, our tendency is to look more towards segmentation data. We also want to understand the industry structure and competition. Obviously, we want to identify who our key competitors are. We also want to define if they're local or imported competitors. We also want to look at barriers to entry, both tariff and non-tariff related. A few examples of non-tariff related would be code compliance deficiencies, packaging, licensing, things of that nature. We also want to understand the channel and distribution networks. So we want to follow the route to customers, and we want to track this from exporter all the way through the value chain to the end customers. We really need to understand how these networks interact. We also want to start looking at the average lead times and the cost of logistics. Some of you may require a temperature controlled container. That would add cost. You need to ask the question, is a bonded warehouse necessary to better serve your customers? Because that would add cost. So we need to start looking at some of these things at a very early stage. We also want to look at regulatory and compliance related issues such as labeling, packaging, and standards of compliance. We want to be mindful about IP and trademark and copyright protection because it's not global. With the exception of copyright, there are some countries that will recognize copyright. We want to identify very early any importing, licensing, registration, and certification or testing requirements that are necessary to export into our new market. We also want to understand our environmental and social impact responsibilities and obligations. We want to start doing some pricing and cost structure at this early stage. We want to really start with doing a typical landed cost breakdown from the cost of goods manufactured through the value chain to the customer price. At this point, we're just doing some initial modeling, but I think at this point we could use benchmark retail and customer and distribution pricing to serve that purpose. We want to start looking at our currency and payment terms. If you're a Canadian company, you're going to be likely trading in either US or Canadian currency. The payment terms bit I'll talk about a little bit later in the second half of the presentation. The pestle tool, in my opinion, is the most valuable tool in measuring external market factors, which are factors we can't control. So we really need to deep dive and examine the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental aspects and factors within a market. Historically, this has been done through observation, so the data is really qualitative, but the data available now has improved so much over the years that we're able now to quantify the pestle tool. So my suggestion here is when you are doing your pestle analysis, you take both a qualitative and quantitative approach when doing your overall pestle analysis. Once we do this, we compile the data, we analyze the data, we synthesize the data, and we present our actionable insights. And the two key words here are actionable insights. This is the deliverable. So it doesn't matter how you communicate it, whether it be Word or PowerPoint or Excel. My suggestion here is to really use whatever is most effective in communicating your actionable insights throughout your organization. For me, I use Power BI because this is my niche, and I don't have a lot of time today, so I can't really go over the report in any detail. But for me, I prefer using Power BI because it allows me to consolidate the data into one report. It's a visual report, and it's interactive, so you can get a lot of information on it. If you wanted to have a closer look at the report, there is a copy of this on my website on the markets diversification page. This example is an ASEAN report with Indonesia being a selected market. So once we've checked all of the boxes and we've got a green light to go, then our next step is to conduct the primary research and analytics. So my belief is that a trade show should anchor your first visit into a market. And I think that you should also plan to stay a week. And the reasons for that would become evident as I go through my presentation. But as Laura alluded to, I mean, it's a fantastic opportunity to get direct voice of customer from channel and end customer engagements. You're able to view emerging technology and new product innovation trends that are up and coming. It's also a fantastic place to measure your competitors, the people that you'll be competing with in the marketplace. My personal view here is I don't think you need a large footprint, but perception is reality. And this is a stage where you really need to put your best foot forward. So the emphasis should really be on the quality of your presentation rather than the size of your booth. Now, when we're in the market and we're staying a week after the trade show, now we can get out and we can visit with the authorities having jurisdiction. We can start to identify the cost and the time to secure certifications or necessary registrations. The whole idea of this process is to really identify the bottlenecks at an early stage, because well before they become significant log jams later in the process. We're also able to gain customer and buyer insights by getting out into the market and engaging potential customers. We're going to be able to understand their pain points, their unmet needs, their purchasing motivations. As a marketer, we always ask the question, is there a gap in a market and a market in the gap because that's where you should be focusing. We're also able to identify price sensitivities and a willingness to pay a price premium. In every market, there's a threshold of affordability. You may very well have a product that will provide, say, 30 or 40% better utility, but there's only a certain amount over the established market price that customers are willing to pay. And we need to identify what that threshold is because it's going to impact and affect how we price position in the market. We also want to understand local perceptions of value and quality and any biasness or sensitivities towards country of origin. With regard to channel partner vetting, I think every company has their own criteria for vetting channel partners. I personally look at three key things. The first thing I ask is, do they have access to my customers? The second question would be, do they have the financial capabilities to support the business from start, scaling, and all the way through the growth curve? And then the third question is, are they or do they have the ability to actually proactively sell my products into a marketplace? If those three questions are answered positively, then I think that you have a really strong foundation to continue your discussions. And hopefully, while you're in the market, spending that week after the trade show, you're able to appoint a new channel partner. We're also able to gain competitor intelligence by being in the marketplace. We're able to do a number of observations. We can look at local pricing, packaging, promotional, and marketing activities. We're able to define the distribution footprint, market share, visibility, overall presence in a market, and we're able to firsthand compare local and imported products. Now, there's a number of different tools that are used for this, and I think SWOT, is probably the most recognized competitor analysis tool. I personally use a competitor profile matrix, a CPM, because I think you need a fine granular detail of data when you're examining and you're comparing your competitors. I use a weighted scorecard, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, is that you really need to understand your competitors as well as you understand your own company. Laura had alluded in her introduction about product fit and adaptation. It's very likely that you're going to need to make some changes or adaptations to product or packaging. But questions that we need to ask are, what are the local environmental or performance conditions? And two that jump right out at me because I've experienced them is climate and voltage. We also want to understand the preferred unit sizes, packaging formats, branding aesthetics, and color, language, or cultural design sensitivities. All of these we need to really get a handle on and understand well before we launch into a marketplace because we need to get it right. Very rarely there's a second chance. With regard to price positioning, hopefully at this stage you're nearing a distribution appointment. The meetings have gone well; they're very positive, and you're feeling good about the channel partner you've selected. Now is the time to start really mapping out where you're going to position your product and position your pricing into a marketplace. My suggestion is that you consider using a market value-based pricing model. It's the Japanese model that I followed for many, many years. And how it works is it starts at the very, very top at the end customer price. It works backwards through the distribution layers, and then it works backwards to the value chain, and it arrives at your cost of goods sold and your cost of goods manufactured, which in essence is your profit. It's a very effective tool or methodology in establishing pricing in markets. In terms of business culture and relationships, again, by being there in the marketplace a week after the trade show, you'll be able to understand the decision-making pace and process. Is it hierarchical? Is it consensus? You'll be able to enjoy trust-building rituals, dinners, coffee shops, site visits, joint customer calls. These are all opportunities to deepen your relationships with the people you're going to be doing business with in the future. You'll also be able to really understand the communication style and expectations. Are they direct or indirect? And one key point that I often mention to people is that markets are built on people and relationships, not products and price points. And this is why you really need to start building your relationships founded on trust and confidence at a very early stage. People that are traveling into new markets, I've always recommended pick up a culture shock book. I'm not here to plug books. There's nothing in it for me at all, but I highly recommend these before you enter into a new country. They're going to provide you with an enormous amount of insight on the culture well before you arrive in the country. You can read it on the plane, and you'll have a very good understanding as to how people behave culturally and socially within the market. And once we've done this, we loop back to our report. We add in our validations. We add any new data that we've accumulated on the way. And then that leads the way into the next step, which would be capabilities assessment. And I'm sure Laura would facilitate a future webinar on this. Obviously, there's not enough time for me to include that part of it in this section. In terms of closing guidance points, I think we need to distinguish between region and market analytics. Regions are not monolithic. You need to really drill down to the market level. Research metrics, they should be company specific. The cookie cutter approach has never worked and it never will work. I believe we should focus on one, maybe two markets to start with. Don't become overwhelmed. I think we need to cross-functionally include all of the silos in the business, make sure that everybody is connected, everybody's on the same page and speaking the same language. I believe we could embrace artificial intelligence, certainly in the research end of it. I think we really need to be careful. Don't take the guardrails off because there are some deficiencies with artificial intelligence and especially with generating insight. Remember that data is useless. It needs to yield actionable insights. And you need to personally be in the market. You need to feel the pulse and the vibe of the market personally. You can't just Google your way into a market. And then seek help from others. You don't need to go it alone. There's lots of help available, and FITT is one organization that can help you to gain the skills and knowledge that you'll need to succeed in the market. What I've covered today is really determining where to compete, which would be included in the feasibility of international trade course that FITT offers. That would lead into determining how to compete. And this is really about strategy and business planning, and they're different in terms of context and purpose. So a course you might want to consider would be international market entry strategies. That would lead into determining how to win, which is really about sales, marketing, business development, and most importantly, execution. So international sales and marketing might be a course that would be interesting to you. In terms of sources, Laura had mentioned a few, and I agree with her. I think we need to be very, very cautious here. There's a lot of choices out there. Some require a subscription, and some can be very expensive. So you really need to vet the source, do a trial, and really make sure that it's going to provide you the data that's necessary for you to do your own analytics. And I'm going to end here, and I kind of wanted to leave with this photograph, which is the Canadarm attached to the space shuttle. And the reason I wanted to close with this is because I think it's a really good image of what can be achieved when countries cooperate. And it's also a really good representation of Canada capabilities on the global stage. So I hope that I provide you some new ideas and concepts, and I thank you all for your attention, and I will pass the podium back over to Laura now. Thank you all.
Peter, that was fantastic. That was so good. I especially liked your guiding notes, your best practices, your insights. That was so good. We have a few questions actually. So I'm going to dive right into them. So for those of you that are just joining for the first time, we have gone a little bit over the half hour. This is meant to be something, a quick webinar, but I never like to cut off my speaker, but then we reserve 15 minutes for Q&A. So you're welcome to stay for if you can allow another 15 minutes. Otherwise, we will record. As I mentioned, this session will be recorded and you'll receive that in a follow-up email. So let's dive in. Since you were talking, Peter, about sources of good validated information. So we have a question from Bill Coleman. He's asking if you ever use primary research like Nielsen IQ or McKinsey surveys before going in, or would you ever use this before going into a market?
It's a very good question. I think it goes back to what I'd stated at the close. I think that you need to seek out and find and use the data that's most relevant for your business. What I showed up there is just a fraction, but there are so many sources available and some that were just mentioned. But I think anything that adds credibility to your analytics, it's just going to ensure that what you're providing is going to be as accurate and as full as possible. I don't think that we should be short on data. More data is better, but just ensure that the data is quality and it really meets the need of the analytics.
Fantastic, fantastic. Peter, maybe if I can just ask you, could you stop sharing your screen?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Laura.
that might be better. Okay, we have another question here from Ketsia, another CITP. Do you have any best practices for service businesses? I'm always thank you for this question, because I always say for product exporters, for service exporters, because our FITT skills training is for both products and services. So if you can just comment on this for service businesses.
It would be difficult for me because it isn't really my wheelhouse. But I can say with anything, when you are competing into an international market, and I don't think it's just services or product related, but a key point is differentiation. What are you offering into a marketplace that is different? You need to rise above your competitors. There needs to be a value proposition that resonates throughout the market. So it needs to go back, when I was talking about being in the market, being present there and asking questions, because what drives the motivation for people to move from being a prospect to being a customer? So I think the process would be the same, and hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you totally. So Sandra's asking, you mentioned looking at new markets. Canada has a free trade agreement with several South American countries, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Costa Rica. What about those markets, or the Caribbean single market of 14 million?
I think with what I had shared would apply globally. It's more the methodology and the process that I was trying to share. I certainly wasn't just focusing on three markets, the EU, Greater Indo-Pacific, and ASEAN. I just kind of selected those as references, but there are opportunities in the markets that you had just mentioned, Laura. And I think what's most important is the methodology or the process would apply, but you would have to obviously make some adjustments to it. What I provide is a framework. But I think as an individual business professional or a marketer or trade professional, I think you have to modify that to meet your specific need.
100%. And I actually, just on that note, I was working for the government of Chile when Canada signed its first free trade agreement with a South American country, and that was the Canada-Chile Free Trade Agreement. That was back in the late 1990s. And what I feel like with free trade agreements, what it does is that there's a lot more data. There's a lot more data available to you to start your research. You might look at countries that have a free trade agreement and then start that process that Peter outlined, that's outlined in our FITT skills training, to really dive in and get that key data that you need to make those strategic decisions. Maybe Chile is a market for you, maybe it's not, maybe it's Peru, maybe it's another country, but it's that methodology that Peter explained that's paramount. So it doesn't matter what area, what region, if there's a free trade agreement or not. I've lectured for many years, and I often told my students, you don't have to select a target market where there's a free trade agreement. There could be ample opportunities in other markets without a free trade agreement. You just have to make that business case and make sure that you can compete in that market and access that market.
Laura, if I would just add to that too, I think that, you hit a really key point there is because there's preferential trade agreements, there's free trade agreements, and there's no trade agreements. There's a variety of different trade agreements. So again, I think that you would have to look at your specific business and the country that you're targeting and examine it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another question here. How can I find local consultants to help with regulatory and customs compliance? That is a great question.
I would, to be quite honest, I would probably flip that over to EDC, Export Development Canada. They're connected with a variety of businesses that could facilitate and provide that service. It's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. My side is more commercial than anything really. So I would say, probably EDC would be the best contact, and you might be able to add on to that, Laura, what your opinions would be.
Yeah, I think that what's important to remember that there are lots of consultants, there are a lot of certified international trade professionals, CITPs, that are consultants that can help you connect the dots. Some of these consultants have expertise in specific regions. Some of these consultants have expertise within certain industries. So it's important to understand your business and who you might want to reach out to. EDC is it's a good start if you're a Canadian company. We have to remember that we have community, like our FITT community is all over the world, but tapping into your local levels of government, important. Like if you're in Canada, your provincial governments have trade departments, tapping into the trade commissioner service or the trade commissioners, whatever country you're from. So there's multiple levels of support that's there for you. So it's just important to understand what exactly you're looking for. So, and that regulatory piece, again, that's a whole different, I know I was in the electrical metering space, so that regulatory compliance was a huge aspect, and there are consultants that help you obtain certifications if you're trying to go into a certain market. So it's very hard to answer that without knowing what your industry is. But it's important to be thinking of regulatory and customs compliance right from the get-go. So thank you for that question. Somebody's asking if the presentation will be made available. I'll have to talk to Peter offline about this. The recording will be available for sure. We will see about getting a PDF of the PowerPoint slides. We have a question. Canadian trade commissioners are a great help. Yes, they are, especially if you are if you're in a priority sector, and also if you're looking to enter into a market, one of the 15, like to take advantage of one of the 15 free trade agreements that Canada has signed. However, what I'd like to say is that, the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service, or it could be any trade promotion bureau around the world, they do want to see that companies that before reaching out to them, they've done some work, they've done some homework, they've done their due diligence, they've identified maybe a few markets with the most potential, and then are reaching out to them to kind of hone in on those key markets that have the most potential. But you really should do some due diligence first. And I really liked what you said, Peter, about the cookie cutter, the cookie cutter approach, and just realizing that you can't drop those safeguards. Like you can't believe everything that you see on the internet, and AI is wonderful, use it for research, but you also have to look at that data critically and maybe sometimes validate that data with some of these other credible sources of information. Okay, we have another question. Do you have any reliable data sources for China?
Well, reliable. That's a tricky word. Um, I think what you had mentioned, Statista would be one. I do rely on their data. But I think when you're examining data that's coming out of China, I really think you need three sources for the same data because there is going to be some variances on really who's doing the observations, who's doing the collection and organizing the data. So if I was looking at data from China, I would definitely look at three sources, and I would, if there was a wide difference between that data, I would probably come down to a mean, and that would be my conclusion in terms of the data. But I think just because of the nature of the data and the unreliability of the data historically, I do think that you need to get multiple sources on the same information.
Excellent. That is a great point. We have another question here. Are the measures taken in a foreign market any different if the goods exported are industrial goods, not commercial goods?
I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, I'm having problem with the measures taken. So I'm wondering if it's compliance. So as I mentioned before, it's very specific to the industry that you're in, the products that you're exporting. So you have to understand the regulation for your specific product.
And also, Laura, I mean, referencing back to the harmonization systems code, because that'll identify that particular product. So that might be able to help a little bit.
Yeah. And just on that note too, so we say, your HS code and you classify your product. For some companies, they're still at the stage where they're not quite sure how to properly classify their products according to the HS code. And then at that point, they might need to reach out and get a customs ruling or talk to individuals that might be able to help them classify their product. So it depends where you are, what type, if you really know your HS code and your product of origin, there's a lot there. So, okay, how do you see the future of international business and Canadian role?
International business. Are we looking at opportunity or I mean, I I mean, there's no secret. I've been a very, very vocal voice about Asia. I think the future is Asia. There's no question in my mind that the future is Asia. All we need to do is really look at the growth, not just by the region, but by individual markets and countries. You look at the rapid pace of technology development, you look at the demographics. I mean, all of those indicators are pointing to the direction that Canada should be focusing more in the Asian market. Typically, we've looked at three markets: China, Japan, and South Korea. The rest of the market has been somewhat ignored, for lack of a better description, but this is truly where I believe that the opportunity is for Canadian businesses. And I think one of the key reasons is we have trust equity built in. Canada, I lived in Singapore for 20 years. I've traveled from Mongolia down to Indonesia, from India all the way to New Zealand. And I can say with a high degree of certainty that Canada has trust equity built in throughout that region. And there's a number of reasons for that. And it's a card that is underplayed in my view, and it's something that could be and should be leveraged to its maximum ability.
Fantastic, fantastic. If I can just comment on this, the future of international business, that's how much time do we have? But what I'd like to say, and I was going to mention it in my closing remarks, but right now, international trade, we're at the forefront. Like we are the cool kids now. The right now with all these trade tensions, these trade wars, never has it been more important to understand what international business and international trade is all about, and the importance of diversifying your trade and not putting all of your eggs in one basket, not focusing only on one market, which makes, could still make economic sense because of proximity. However, when there's a change in policy, when there's, all of a sudden, when there are tremendous tariffs being imposed, then you might need to look at other markets. And if it's not right now that you're being affected by tariffs, you could be affected 2 years from now, 5 years from now. So the best time to diversify was probably 5 years ago. Second best time is now. So for every organization out there, it's important to start the process because you don't know what the future is going to hold.
Laura, if I could just add to your comments and, just referring to North America regional trade. I mean, obviously, there are trade tensions between Canada and the US, and that will likely not subside, soon. In fact, the Kuzma agreement is going to be reviewed in June, I think it is, or July of next year, and there may be changes at that point in time. My point is that administrations will change, the situation will change, but trade, global trade, regional trade has changed forever. And I think that we really need to make adjustments for the world we live in today. We'll continue to trade with the US and Mexico. We're just regionally intertwined and interdependent. But we also need to be looking at new market opportunities that are outside of North America. It just makes economic and financial sense.
Excellent. I like that. Somebody else is asking about in the chat. I see, many countries are scrambling for the resource-rich African markets. We can't possibly comment on all areas, in Canada's trade policy. But what's important, and if you get anything out of today, I believe that there are tremendous opportunities for those that are prepared. So if the opportunities lie in African markets, if the opportunities lie in ASEAN or South America, wherever that is, you have to make sure that it is truly feasible for your company to export to that market and to start to explore. So it's, maybe we have a second webinar on, I don't know, or another webinar in the future on different regions and different areas, but sort of falls outside the scope of today. But thank you for your interest. Great questions, great comments in the chat. So maybe I'm looking at the time, maybe we will end with the last and probably the easiest question for you today, Peter. What is the best possible way to connect with you other than LinkedIn?
I don't mind circulating my email address, my website, www.advantstrategy.com. I can be contacted through that, or my direct email. Laura, you can share that. I have no problem in sharing that with the group, and LinkedIn, of course, too. I'm very accessible.
Excellent. Thank you for that. That it looks like, yeah, I think we've covered most of the questions. If I missed a question, because you put it in the chat, not Q&A, you can always reach out to me, laura@fitt.ca. But for now, I just thank you so much, Peter. That was
Oh, you're more than
wonderful. I
welcome.
feel like we could have gone on for another, I feel like we just scratched the surface. I do like your idea of doing maybe a follow-up on capabilities assessment. That's quite interesting. For those that joined us today for the first time, I hope this has given you an idea of who FITT is, what we offer in terms of our courses, our certification of international trade professionals, and just providing individuals with that ability to think strategically and to make those decisions that will help you grow and scale internationally in the future. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our community. I recognize so many names. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks
Bye,
again,
Laura.
Peter. Wonderful. Bye, Peter.